Welcome to the third event in the Friends of the Sheldon Jackson Museum. Share your culture, share your research winter series. We have other events scheduled right through March, so please join us for all or one of them. The next talk will be in January on Friday the 13th at noon. It's entitled The Courage of Agnes Young McAlpin, the Forgotten Story of a Haida Woman, with Marcia Biederman. Some of the events happening later in the winter will be in person and on Zoom simultaneously. See the Friends of the Sheldon Jackson Facebook page for details. Today, we would like to acknowledge and express our appreciation to the indigenous people of Tlingit who have occupied this land for longer than any of us can imagine, and are graciously allowing us today to share this amazing land with them. Thank you. Today's presentation by Laine will include a history of Chilkat weaving, its origin, how this style of weaving has traveled, and how it continues to spread across different tribes. Additionally, Laine will share the Chilkat robe, woven as an artist at the Sheldon Jackson Museum in June of 2021. Laine Rinehart is a talented Chilkat and spruce root weaver. They are of Tehiton clan from Wrangell and a child of the Kagwanton clan through their father. Rinehart has previously been an artist in residence at the Sheldon Jackson Museum. This talk is co-sponsored by the Yukon Tanana Historical Society. And with that, Laine, I'll turn it over to you.
Gnachish Nichanagu ye Yuhatuasak ye I had Teaton I had Kakwanton Yadi. As Melissa mentioned, I am of the Teaton clan and child of the Kakwanton. I'm adopted actually to my grandfather's clan, the Teaton from Wrangell, Alaska. I'm also of Taos Pueblo descent on my mother's side, Tiwa specifically, and just really honored to be welcomed into my father's people and have a place amongst them, and also begin to, connect to it even more so through, the practice of Chilkat weaving, spruce root weaving. It's been a wonderful way to reconnect to my heritage, especially on my father's side, and just begin that kind of healing process that I think a lot of us experience when engaging with our traditional art forms and art styles. And I know that Jackie kind of requested that I do a sort of a historical perspective on Chilkat weaving for this talk. And there's a lot of stories, I think, out there. I'm not familiar with all of them. So, and I know, Patty, you're pretty knowledgeable as well. So I don't want to necessarily call people out, but, my perspective may be limited. So if you have any insight, please feel free to add. I don't want this to be necessarily just a closed forum where I'm giving a lecture, but, invite other people to offer their insights as well throughout it, although I will be sharing about my robe specifically as well. One of the ones that I think I kind of am most closely related to, and I may not have all of the details of it right, and nor with some stories is it necessarily my right to tell them, but from what I understand, Chilkat weaving eventually made its way up to the Tlingit through essentially trade relationships with the Tsimshian people, Niska people further down south, and then their relationships to the Haida. So as I understand it, that there was this, very beautiful woven apron that, a chief really wanted and was, making all these offers of trade, either, boxes of ooligan grease and things like this. And then eventually, they settled on the price of, a bunch of the red berries, which I think we believe to mean soap berries from kind of the interior, because they're, extremely valuable along the coastal areas where we don't necessarily have access to them as well. So I believe there may have been some, devious undertaking anyhow. eventually made its way up into sort of the Chilkat area. And even though it's called Chilkat weaving, it doesn't necessarily refer to a people necessarily, more so a place, is what I've been told. So eventually made its way up to the Chilkat area where women kind of deconstructed it. Actually, they saw this wonderful woven piece that's told a story, and before, prior to this, the women had been weaving the geometric style raven's tail weaving, which is a direct kind of almost transference from the techniques of basketry into a woven textile form, and being able to then weave the curvilinear sort of adapted form line is what my colleague Lily Hope likes to call it, kind of this adapted form line style. Then we were therefore able to start weaving clan crest, clan stories, and things of that nature. But I think it's really just important to acknowledge, especially Raven's Tail, as being in a way kind of like solely a woman's art form. It was woven by women. Men did have a hand in the harvesting of the mountain goat, and then the designs themselves were adaptations of the designs women created within the context of basketry, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. But somewhere along these hundreds of years, it eventually developed into Chilkat weaving. And I apologize, I don't have a example of a raven's tail weaving in front of me, but you can kind of see how this progression takes place, where it's these very geometric forms at first, and then you see the incorporation of more of the curvilinear and curved aspects that Chilkat weaving allows you to do. So there's a sort of transitionary period that took place where more of these circular elements were being incorporated into the woven form, and even at first, you might see that Raven's Tail weaving may have had these like kind of rectangular or squarish boxes within the weaving, and so even the Chilkat weaving elements would have been incorporated into almost like a design, kind of the design elements that one would typically find in a Raven's Tail weaving. So it's kind of interesting to see how that process took place, and just see just how people sort of met the challenge of solving, like, how do we get this curvilinear shape. And you can kind of almost see how people eventually managed to essentially create a circular style weaving, which is pretty unique to the Northwest coast, amongst the Tlingit and Cheyenne and other people as well, and that you don't really see that in any other textile form in the world. You might see embroidered, where it's been embroidered later on, but being able to incorporate rather, circles and curves into the weaving itself is pretty unique to our region. So I think I always thought that was pretty cool, just when I began first studying it, and to how it continues to spread to this day. There was a group of women amongst who sort of the teaching lineage that I come from. In the late 80s, early 90s, they met with Jenny Flanot over in up in Klukwan, Alaska. I believe the Alaska Heritage Institute kind of hosted or funded a cohort of weavers to go up there and learn from her. And she was kind of widely considered as the last, living master of this art form, within the context of learning it in the traditional sense, where she learned it in the clan house from her aunt. And then, they reached a point where, there's not a lot of people doing it anymore. So they called together this group of people, and, a lot of women took that on. And Clarissa was one of those women who went on to teach a great many of us how to weave, including her daughter, who kind of continues her mother's work to this day. Lily Hope hosts an online meeting Zoom session where she teaches people from Washington, the lower 48, other parts of Alaska into Canada, and then other teachers as well continue that work, working with people even that may just be able to sit with you for a little bit and pass it on that way. So a lot of thanks to all those people out there that are working on continuing to keep this art form alive and vibrant, and I think at one point it was almost kind of considered an endangered art form. I don't really think of it that way. I think it's a very living, a really living art form that's full of vibrancy. Plenty of people practice it. There's new people learning. I think it feels like every day there's people taking up more interest in, reconnecting with these art forms. So I kind of maintain a hopeful perspective of it. I think maybe a couple of decades ago, we may have looked at it and it may have been a little bit more like, oh no, we need to do something about this. And that's not to say that work doesn't need to continue. Of course, it always does. But I think I'm just one of, many people that could be here talking about the same thing with as much expertise as I do, perhaps even more so. But I saw this opportunity to get on here, and I just wanted to kind of be an informal just update of what I've been doing since being at the Sheldon Jackson summer of God, I want to say it was 2020, 2021. I don't know where time flies anymore, but when I started over at Sheldon Jackson Museum, I had just essentially just started this piece, and it's amazing how the time flies kind of, and you want to make it so far, but I also have a day job and things like this and daily life. But I think I had not even gotten through the main border of it. And it's still not a whole lot to look at yet, but I feel like it's kind of finally starting to get to the point where I can almost say like, wow, it's starting to sort of look like a robe. Mostly in this area. And it's kind of interesting. I feel like we kind of tend to write, as we write from left to right. I actually started over here on the right-hand side and was sort of working this way, but then at one point I started kind of working on this section more. And, it's a challenge every day, but it's also kind of one of the challenges I look forward to of how I'm going to sort of take the artist's intent of the designer and then translate this into a textile form. So there's been different adaptations I've made throughout this process. He has these very kind of like, I almost think of them as whimsical lines where the curves kind of almost have accent marks, like in music, where they kind of like flow in before creating the shape. And so I kind of had to make adaptations to the way I would typically weave this element by inserting like the different, what we call braiding. And I'm going to actually, I apologize, this isn't very professional. I wish I had somebody here to help me with this, but I'll go ahead and just move my camera closer, or my camera closer here, rather. And so I kind of inserted this braid a little differently than we might typically do it. It might kind of come across more straight across, but that's sort of the adaptation we can make in Chilkat weaving, where some of the curved elements of the U shapes and all these things kind of take more of a rectangular form rather than having more of the traditional ovoids. But I was trying to maintain as close to possible his design elements. And here we have kind of the side profile face in the corners. I think through a lot of the study we've been doing recently that typically speaking, there would be almost this like blue element in the upper corners of a Chilkat weaving, but we thought we would kind of make this a little bit different. We were kind of incorporating a lot of the traditional kind of elements, but then also he's a contemporary artist and I'm a contemporary weaver. So he almost kind of referred to it as like neoclassical form line, if that makes sense. And in a way, this kind of harkens back to maybe a time period before the design elements were so set in weaving. Like there was this kind of period before where you could see that there was different takes on how to design a Chilkat blanket. And then at a certain point, it became almost formulaic, if that makes sense, where there would be, typically, like I said, those like blue elements up here. At some point, green became less frequent in Chilkat weaving, and then blue became a little bit more prevalent, perhaps with the availability of blue dye, and then things like that. Do I gather and process my materials? In fact, I do. I will oftentimes. Actually, the last time I was in Sitka, I gathered yellow cedar bark because there's a lot of yellow cedar bark. And you can kind of see it hanging up in my window, actually. I don't have window shades. Instead, I just hang strips of yellow cedar bark instead, apparently. So that's what's up there, kind of waiting until I can get to it, and it seems to be doing a good job of keeping it dry and not moldy and things like that. But that, yeah, that's incorporated into the warp that is spun. And so, this is all thigh spun warp. This is actually using merino wool. Sort of my pet project lately has been working with mountain goat specifically. And I can go ahead and pull some of that off my mannequin right now. I kind of jokingly say that this is my new best friend, but this is a mannequin I got. Somebody was closing down their shop in Juneau, so I've always wanted a mannequin, but this is actually a mountain goat warp that's hanging off of it. And we call this, there's a name for it in Tlingit, but I can't quite remember it off the top of my head, but it's called making clouds, but it's referring to this sort of drafting process we do in weaving or working with wool, where you kind of pull from your, a clump of wool, so to speak, what you're going to eventually spin. And so here I've kind of, taken a clump of mountain goat wool and I've drafted it. We call it it's called drafting, where you pull and you pull and you pull. And then from that, I was able to spin it into a single ply. This is all just in preparation to spin the warp here, and which is kind of almost like a cordage, but that's what hangs vertically from the robe that we twine across. And so over the years, I've collected a number of hides and have been working with people in order to spin it. So I still have a few more cones, but this is another process that I kind of go through as she was able to spin my mountain goat into this, beautiful kind of, it's not quite a fingering weight, nor is it a lace weight, but it's somewhere in between the two. I kind of like working with a little bit of a finer yarn. I feel like you're able to get more detail in a smaller space. Like the salmon head trout here, I think if I was working with a fingering weight yarn, I don't think I would have been able to get a salmon head trout into this kind of space, just because of the amount of rows you can do with a smaller yarn is greater within the same amount of space. So this was somewhere in between a fingering weight and a lace weight yarn. And she was able to spin this using kind of modern spinning techniques, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. She wasn't sure if she'd be able to do it, actually, because the fiber length of mountain goat wool is shorter than merino wool. And so a lot of the machines are, made specifically for merino. So she was able to pull it off, and I was happy with the end result. There is a few guard hairs in here, but if you look at the old blankets, there's, some guard hairs in the warp and things like that as well. So I'm not too worried about that, and I can kind of pick them out. Or I was thinking get like one of those they have those like little trimmers for wool shirts or wool sweaters. I was like, well, I can just kind of go kind of almost like mow the lawn, but on my robe or whatever it is I weave after I'm done. But we'll see there. And then this is kind of the fascinating thing. I know that there was this whole dye cohort up here in Alaska that was working with the traditional dyes, but even the way that dyes take on mountain goat is different. And I think that has something to do with perhaps the protein, because I guess there's this whole chemistry behind dyeing, which I don't really quite understand, but apparently the chemicals in the dye, regardless of whether you use a quote unquote natural dye or a synthetic dye, adhere to the proteins in whatever animal fiber you're working with. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it with the camera, but this is using just a hemlock bark as a dye source. And this is a little strand of merino yarn that I used just to tie the skein of mountain goat weft together with. But this is the same hemlock bark dye bath, same amount of time, but the merino wool is much darker than the mountain goat wool. So there's some problem solving I have to do there. And this was all an attempt to get black, which is extremely hard to get, apparently, from a natural dye source. People apparently will do like an iron mordant and then mix it with the hemlock. And I haven't quite gotten to that step yet, because I think apparently the iron mordant can kind of make your yarn a little bit more brittle, and ideally kind of deteriorate a little bit more quickly, and ideally we'd like our weavings to last as long as possible. So I have some more problem solving to do. I might acquiesce and use a synthetic dye in order to get my black, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. This is from, this mountain goat one is from a wolf's moss. It's, you know, kind of like a lichen or a moss from the Pacific Northwest that again, we acquired through trade. You know, Tlingits, Haidas, all of us were very trade-oriented people. And so this is actually came from kind of the Washington area. And I guess we traded, you know, with people further down south or the interior because wolf moss doesn't grow here. And so that's what that looks like. And I think it's absolutely fabulous yellow and kind of looks more akin to the yellow that you would see in an older robe. And a good friend of ours, you know, in the weaving community, Patty Fiorella has been working extensively with natural dyes over the years. And so I've been kind of, you know, brainstorming with her, and she actually came in one day after having apparently dyed like a little sampler using crabapple bark, like the wild crabapple tree. She just shaved it and just had this gorgeous yellow from that. And so there's been some sort of theorizing like, well, why was it wolf's moss like, and why did we prefer that? And I guess it's because it's a fairly shelf stable dye source. Like you can have dried wolf's moss and keep it dry and on your shelf or wherever it is that it was stored. And then, you know, when you were ready to dye, you could go ahead and dye with it. So I think that that's perhaps why it was, because apparently yellow is one of the most prevalent dyes in nature that you can acquire. It's pretty easy to come across something that you can dye yellow. And so that's been another kind of, in this whole realm, there's always things you can kind of get lost in and rabbit holes you can go down. So I think it's, you know, the whole natural dye process is equally fascinating as weaving itself. And I've really kind of taken to that, but kind of back to this, you know, being over here, you know, in Tlingit society, you know, Chilkat robes were considered typically, for the most part, atu, you know, kind of a clan object or, you know, told a clan story. I think that, you know, perhaps the exception to that is the so-called diving swale pattern, which you'll see in a lot of Chilkat weavings. And perhaps part of that may have been because it was more easily traded, could have been more easily used as a trade item because it didn't tell a specific clan history. And, you know, again, if anyone has a story, do you use a pattern board? I use actually a big transparency. I have a big transparency of the design. I meant to pull it down earlier. It's kind of hanging up on my wall right now, actually. But I use a giant transparency. And so from that, well, I can show you a small example of it. I'll cut out different portions of it. So I have a couple copies of it. And so for this one, I just went ahead and cut it out. So, you know, when I'm over here, well, okay, I won't use that bench again, but over here I can kind of hold it up and shoot. I'm gonna move my camera. I apologize. I can kind of hold it up and make adjustments as I weave to the shapes if I need to, but I think that the primary thing here is that the form line, the black form line that you can see here, it's like we may be drawn into these inner elements and these shapes, but really the black is what we're trying to get to. And that kind of shows the form of the creature itself that's within the weaving. I'm going to readjust my my bench here real quick. And but I don't use a traditional pattern board. We kind of have the modern transparency as our pattern board these days. But you know, we could, you know, so again, atu, but I've heard this term recently called Atana, I believe, and it's kind of like an encounter with like a supernatural being. That's like, you know, it's not atu at this point, but it refers to an encounter that you've had with your clan crest or your, you know, your clan spirit or what have you. And so this robe kind of tells the story that I had with a frog when I was out picking the goonberries one year, and out from underneath this new goonberry kind of popped these like little baby frogs. I was about to pick it, and all these, I could see the moss rustling underneath it, and all these like little frog heads appeared from underneath the berry and then started jumping away. And I was like, wow, how fascinating. So I've always kind of wanted to weave that experience, and this is sort of my first attempt at it. And so that's what these like little side profile faces sort of represent, or these like little beams kind of popping out from underneath the moss. And a lot of these U shapes will sort of refer to the leaves and things like that. But so I think that that's kind of where I don't know that this will necessarily be Atuwu. I can't make that determination. That's outside of my control, but it is kind of a reference to an experience that I had as a person. So that's kind of the origin of the design of it. And one thing as weavers that we have the opportunity to do is adapt, this form line, this person's artistic rendition of this experience into a textile. And one of the things that the designer of this robe did, Abel Ryan, who's a very accomplished Tsimshian artist, was he had all these vertical side profile faces, which I absolutely loved. But after weaving about 3/4 of one, I was like, do I want to do that 4 more times throughout the course of this robe? Because this took me, I don't know, like 2.5 weeks of sitting here to try to like figure out how do I weave a vertical side profile face. And I'm like, it looks okay, it's not bad, but I also not sure if I want to continue along that path 4 more or 3 more times rather after that one's done. So I decided to negotiate with myself, and I on this side, rather than weave that, I started weaving the sort of more vertical sort of eye shape over here where it has like the eyelid and then the ovoid form. And so I decided I may kind of compromise with myself there and so still sort of have a reference to that shape, but make it a little bit more simplified. And we have the freedom to do that as weavers. So that's kind of what I decided to do instead. And it's made the energetic process of being able to get through this weaving and like weave it a lot quicker. Beforehand, I think I was very intimidated by this, whereas with the other shape I started on this side, I feel like, okay, I know how to do that. I can do that. I can kind of make my way through that process. And it also has a lot of these circles here. So I really enjoyed, weaving these circular shapes amidst the U shapes. Like typically speaking, this, and I feel like this is because this is a Tsimshian stereotyping a little bit, but I think because Abel really, really loves his like secondary and tertiary elements. And I feel like maybe I need to backpedal a little bit here, but we would call this black part, the primary form line design. And then there's secondary elements, perhaps like the salmon head trout, but then within the salmon head trout, there's like, tertiary shapes, or, over here, there's the U shape, but then there's these circles. And typically speaking, I think, you might have this split U shape, but you don't have to have these circles in here. That's just for flair, or to, add a little bit of an accent mark to it. But he wanted circles in there. And so even though it takes me, gosh, probably about, 12 more hours in this to weave a circle in this place instead of just having yellow go back and forth, I think it absolutely looks amazing after I wove them. So I'm going to keep them. And I'll have to kind of go ahead and just acknowledge that this robe may take me quite a bit of time and be okay with that. And then same over here, there's a similar smaller split U shape here that also has 2 circles in it, but it's even smaller. So it's like the weaving has to get, that much more intense within a small space. And I was just talking to a friend of mine and she works in sort of audio editing for like podcasts and things like that. And because what did she say? She was like, I feel like I have to live within a piece that I'm editing, so she might have like a 2-hour interview with somebody, but then she has to define it to like a 15-20 minute chunk. And she's like, I refer to it as I'm living inside that piece of audio for 2 hours. And I feel like in a way that sort of applies to sort of anything that you really immerse yourself in, that for a minute you're living inside of it and you're starting to know it on this very intimate level. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective to have. And another thing that she said that I really appreciated was the story will reveal itself. So she works in interviews and, you know, making podcasts and looking for like a story within a conversation. And she was like, you know, sometimes you can approach something and like kind of almost impose your will upon it. Like, I'm going to force the story to happen here. But she was like, one of her teachers always told her that, you know, the story will reveal itself. And you don't really have to force it to happen. And I feel like I felt like I learned a lot from that conversation. You know, I can sit here and theorize and talk about Chilkat weaving all day, but like until I immerse myself and live within it, then the story won't reveal itself, right? But nor can I impose myself too much upon it, or the story that it has to tell won't be its own story. And I think that we kind of have this sort of concept that, you know, of free will, so to speak, or having a spirit. But all things have a spirit in our worldview. And so it's kind of important as a weaver to not impose ourselves too much on it and allow it to tell its own story too. And I think maybe that kind of showed itself in, you know, trying to theorize whether, am I going to really do this vertical side profile faced a bunch of times, or does it need to be something else here? And not struggle with that too much. I don't know if that really makes sense or not, but to me it did at the time. And I think that, you know, that concept is very kind of prevalent. There's this, I'm kind of a big Lord of the Rings nerd fan of that author. And there's this sort of weaving deity kind of goddess figure, you know, in his work, that's sort of referenced in the mythological sense, but she essentially weaves like, you know, the history of time and things like that. It's kind of almost this concept of like determinalism, like, is everything preconceived? You know, do we have free will or not? But then it's like there can be little variations within that, or I chose to do this. So it's kind of like, you know, that question too, whether just because this was designed a specific way, or that I have this real, you know, concept in my head that, oh, it has to be a particular way, it's not necessarily going to turn out like how either the designer or myself as the weaver really planned on it is coming out. It's going to kind of have its own path as well throughout that journey. But that's sort of where I what is your previous weaving experience? Isn't this a cumulative learning process? Previous weaving experience. Gosh, I started in, I want to say 2006 is when I started. And I started, it was a celebration year. I'll come out and say it. And this woman had just woven a raven's tail robe and was dancing at that celebration. And I don't know why, I just had never, I mean, I had seen the robes, but I think something about like hearing her personal story, or, you know, the story of the person that wove it and seeing it kind of come alive really inspired me to kind of start on this journey. And so that was sort of the, what would you call it? Sort of the aha moment, or the impetus to begin. I was like really fascinated, and I took a class with Kay Parker, who's taught many of us. I think she just received a Yanyedi name not that long ago at a party that I was at. So I'm glad she is being acknowledged as really contributing to our Tlingit community. So I started with her, and it was really, and yeah, it is a cumulative a process of like, okay, reaching a point, right? But we're always improving. I love this like really, you know, Ishan kind of lumpy bag in her class, and I was like so happy with it. You know, it didn't look great, but I was very happy with it at the time. I was like, wow, I did this. And it still lives somewhere amidst my things. I still have it. You know, I'm still quite proud of it in a way. So it tells my journey. It tells my journey from, you know, beginning at something that I don't know that I necessarily had a natural talent for. I mean, maybe eventually after I honed it, but then I kind of continued to grow and immerse myself within it a little bit more. So I think that was an important part of it. So I started with Kay Parker, and then eventually I started working with Clarissa while she was in town and she was still alive. And I worked with her daughter before, you know, actually I almost felt like I had to harass Lily to teach me. One of my in-laws or cousins was I'm gonna learn from her, and I kind of just invited myself along. I was like, oh wow, you guys are gonna learn you're gonna learn how to weave. Can I come too? And then so I feel like I pretty much just showed up at Lily's doorstep, and she taught me how to do a circle. We took I went over to her house, and I think she just had Betty and Lois at the time. But I was like, Lily, can you teach me how to do a circle? And she was like, sure. I didn't think it would take like all night, but we were there until about 11:30 midnight, from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon till about that time. And we somehow managed to get a circle done in that time period, which was good. And kind of from there, I kind of just went with it. I learned how to do the different shapes. And part of it is that we don't really live in a time period where we have necessarily somebody always sitting with us at any given time to show us how to do something. So and it's like you can kind of feel like the energy of the people that have done it before you, but you may not always have your teacher sitting side by side. So there's some things that I've had to kind of like call out to them, like, how do I do this shape? Because I've never done a salmon head trout before, and have never sat with somebody that has woven one before. But I actually did this one while I was doing the residency at the Burke Museum in Seattle. But thankfully, there was a robe there on display, and so every time I kind of became overwhelmed with that process or needed guidance, I would walk over to that robe, and it would kind of it would show me, this is how you do it. It wouldn't maybe tell me that way, or have my their hands on mine showing me how to do it, but it was there. That ability to reference the old pieces is invaluable, because I don't think I would have been able to weave the salmon headed trout unless there was that robe there kind of guiding me along the process of it, even though it wasn't able to tell me word for word or stitch for stitch how to do it. So yeah, it is definitely kind of a cumulative learning process for sure, without a doubt. And this one I wrote a grant for it, and I honestly didn't think I would get the grant, and I was like, I pretty much cursed to myself when I got it, and so I kind of was like, okay, I have to spin everything first, find a designer, and then begin to weave it. And I wouldn't trade it for anything else in the world. I've absolutely, I think, grown as a human being, even by being able to start the undertaking of weaving a robe. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I think it's always good to refer back to the intent behind something, but not necessarily get caught up in that it has to be that way exactly. And so I think that having the ability to like let the robe speak for itself, and to be able to kind of come out and show me what it needs to be done in these different areas is absolutely crucial to the process for me. How long did it take to set it up to begin to weave? Yeah, I think it was and I think that that's kind of always really the fascinating thing behind it, because it's like you kind of have to almost ask yourself, like, what, gosh, well, where did it really begin, right? I And it's kind of funny, because I think we can kind of almost look at these things as being like labors of love, or it's so hard, but like really, I think that is part of it, is that there's this whole process that happens to even begin to weave a robe. And I think that harkens back to like the community of people that are behind something like this, because I don't think that this art form would have existed in isolation. Like, even though I have this robe in my studio, this isn't possible without a community of people standing behind it. You are not the person to ask me if the letters on if to the right on the robe are those letters IP. No, this will eventually close off into a actually, it's going to be the mouth of a side profile face, but I love that. And I didn't see it either until somebody asked me, and I was like, it does look like an I and a P. I can't deny that. So yes, it is an I and a P, but not forever. Eventually, it'll close off into a mouth. So that'll be on a lot of the side profile shapes. There's like this mouth, and so that's eventually what they'll close off into being. But this was probably about 3 months of spinning time to get the warp, and then I had harvested the cedar bark prior to that. So it felt like for about a 3-month window that there was constantly cedar bark, in the crock pot or, kind of stewing and getting ready to be spun. So it was about 3 months of spinning time, to get the warp ready for it. And then, there was some time that I spent with Abel, probably within the context of that 3 months, thinking about, the concept behind the robe, the story that we wanted to tell with it. So there was that work with him. Some of the cedar bark I received as a gift from a friend of mine, actually Pam Credo Hayes. So, her hands kind of went into this too. The people, I think it was her nephews or somebody that maybe have collected it for her as well. So they were part of the process. And so, it's always hard to kind of like trace back to like where did it, how much time did it take to even get to this point? But yeah, probably about 3 months of spinning and however long it took the people to harvest the materials and then all that prep time in between. My uncle actually made me the loom, and so there was his time, put into the creation of this beautiful loom that he made. I felt like I met like I got to like almost like a checkpoint mark on a rate, somewhere when I was able to put in this board, which we can put our braids over. And I was like, wow, I have enough braids to put this, bar across it. So this kind of cross beam. And so I know it, I mean, it almost only feels like there's only like a little bit done here, but this is, me chipping away at it probably about 3-4 hours a day consistently over the last, year and a half or so, however long it's been. But it kind of really goes into, showing you, okay, 8 hours a day, maybe I would have been down here instead. But each one, it really depends on the design of the rope that you're working on, the complexity of it, and how much detail you want to put into it. Like I could have taken these circles out and not done them, but now there's these circles in there and I love them. So I wouldn't take them out for the world. And this robe may take me 3-4 years to weave. I'm not entirely positive. But yeah, no, I do love that. Somebody was like, I was in Seattle demonstrating this robe, and somebody was like, "Are those your initials?" And like, I don't think so. Do I have the initials? And then I was like, oh, okay, I see what you see now. But no, they'll turn into something else here in the next little bit. Other fun things. So I received a call the other day from a friend of mine, Lily, and I'll be right back. I guess a mountain goat had like fallen somewhere, so I went up with a friend of mine and we collected the wool from it. And so I had just got done processing and cleaning a bunch of wool that had been at Lily's studio. And I was like, yeah, I'm finally done cleaning all this wool for her, because sometimes I'll stop by her studio and just help out with things around there, just because that's what we do. And so I just got done cleaning all this other wool, and then sure enough, like lo and behold, more wool coming in. So it's like that concept of like, if there's a void, something will come in and fill that space, right? Well, now there's more wool to be cleaned. And she kind of like has this class every Friday that she leads online. And she was like, well, if there's one thing as an artist that you wish you could take out of your life, it was like, what would it be? And I was like working with my mountain goat warp or spinning. I was like, gosh, I really wish I didn't have to pull any guard hairs out of this mountain goat right now. And then I was like, okay, why look at it that way? And it's like, it's such a blessing to work with our traditional materials. And I just like went back to processing the base part of what we do. And that really lies within, the mountain goat, and just having that gratitude for it, and being able to kind of go through that process of helping to harvest the wool from this, animal who gave its life willingly or not. I don't know whether it really meant to fall from the mountainside somewhere, but it felt like, we're here doing the work of our ancestors. And it was one of those moments where I really didn't feel like I knew what I was doing, even though I've been weaving for X amount of time. And I have worked with hides, like rotting, pulling the wool from the hides. I had not had like an encounter with, the I mean, I consider, you know, the mountain goat to be a spiritual being of some sort, but I had not had that like up and close experience with the mountain goat before that. And I was like, well, again, the story will reveal itself, but you kind of have to like live within it for a minute. So it's just that time to just kind of like let everything go and just hope that your hands will know what to do once you're provided with that opportunity. And so thankfully there was another friend of mine that's a fellow weaver in Adesta. And between the two of us, were able to find a way to kind of approach it in a respectful manner that I think you know, was efficient and that also treated the being with integrity, but also be able to get what we needed as weavers from it. So I don't know. Anyone feel free to hop in there and ask a question. Please come off mute if you'd like to. We only have a few more minutes left. Sorry if that was me just rambling for about 45 minutes, an hour. That's what I tend to do.
So Laine, is the mountain goat wool plucked,
Plucked?
like pulled from, I mean, can you harvest it like, because kiwi used to be harvested by just picking up what the muskox had left behind as it went on its way.
You can do that. And in fact, a lot of what they had come down from the mountain some people brought some in, and you know, it was interesting because when it fell, there was a bunch of wool that had just kind of like as it was falling, fluffed off of it into like the bushes and in the trees and stuff like that. So you can harvest that. It'll tend to be really, really dirty though. And so what you are able to pull from the animal directly is usually the cleaner stuff, although we will not turn down any mountain goat wool that's brought in. So but yeah, and actually what we ended up doing was we have like the wool combs, and so we ended up just kind of brushing it, and then the wool kind of came off of the mountain goat, and then kind of left the guard hairs behind too. But you know, this particular wool, you know, has hairs in it, and so I'll kind of go in and go through and pull them. But yeah, they'll brush up against seams and they'll leave their wool. So that does happen too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, please, Ronald.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. We're beaming in from the Fairbanks area, and we've been very curious about how we might be able to learn more about other parts of the state. And we were just lucky to find this opportunity.
Well,
and I just hope that we have more opportunities to share information from around the state.
Yeah, that would be great.
We know, but we don't know a lot of other things too. So thank you.
Yeah, goodness, sheesh. And same with me too. It's like I feel like you know, we all live in our bubbles of Alaska sometimes, and it's good to get to know other people from other parts of the state too. My friend that I've been talking about, who told me about the story of like, you know, the story will reveal itself. She's actually from Nome and then moved to Anchorage and then to Juneau. So I feel like she has a very different view of Alaska than me, I lived in Southeast Alaska my whole life, and she's kind of come from these different communities of Alaska. And so it's been great to get to know her. Thank you, Patty.
And thank you all for your patience. We had some technical issues here at the beginning, but we're glad that we had about at the top. I think we had 18 or so folks. So welcome to all you folks up north. And it was great to have you join us. And we hope that we can do some more of this too.
Absolutely.
And thanks, Laine. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary.
Mm-hmm.
Right, awesome. Thank you, everyone. It's been fun to be with you. Oh, the UK. Wow. Okay. Right, bye. Thanks, Melissa.